down, because for any economy, I think what it looks like down the tunnel is extremely important. I think a few significant changes have taken place in India, both in its decision-making process and the direction. The first is that a very large section of the people have become increasingly more aspirational, and therefore they are in a hurry, they are impatient. And they want governments to continuously take decisions, and the decisions must consistently be in one direction. Any form of rollbacks, reversal, contrarian trends, I don't think that's an agenda which is acceptable today. As a result of this aspirations, there is a certain spike as far as regional aspirations are concerned. And therefore you will always find a large number of states which have also become increasingly aspirational, and therefore want to join the entire bandwagon effect. But we are the ones who should be attracting investment. So states which were conventionally not known to be reformatory in character, their language, their idiom, their expression, their policy has significantly changed. And of course, some of the fast-moving states, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, these of course continue to maintain that entire pace, and therefore they have the ability to pull up the national average itself. I think if you look at the kind of activity which has been going on, let's take infrastructure creation, something which we lagged behind. And therefore, 10 or 20 years down, what India looks at. As I speak to you today, you have almost over 250 national highways under construction. And that's a speed which has picked up, which will continue to accelerate. The railways investment in infrastructure started somewhat slowly, but over the last few months is significantly picking up. And now I see over the next 1 or 2 years, there are going to be a large number of those 400 railway stations with private sector participation up for redevelopment, which are going to take place. The airport expansions, particularly with regard to the regional airports, I think is now gathered pace and is going on quite significantly. Ports, of course, is one area which had always attracted a lot of investment, and over the last 2 to 3 decades, private sector participation had significantly increased. I think urbanization, more particularly suburbanization and affordable housing, these are going to be areas of very large investment over the next 1 or 2 decades, which will also see a very large migration of people coming from the rural areas into the urban areas. And around the major townships or the mid-level townships also, we see a lot of suburbanization which is going to take place. A considerable amount of national resource also is going to get into rural India. For instance, by next year, we anticipate that every village in India will be connected by a regular road. 2022 is the target for rural housing. Electrification, for every village, I think there are only a handful of villages left now which required electrification. So the next target, that within a village, should we not be targeting every home which is without electricity. Sanitation. I think the last 3.5 years has seen about 40 million new toilets being built, and that's an area both by the government and also by private sector, CSR, etc., which has picked up in a big way. And therefore, if we look at the entire landscape of what's happening over the next 1 or 2 decades, I think it's going to look extremely different. And all this is accompanied by the fact that both reforms which were relatively low-hanging fruits and reforms which were more complicated and were more structural in character, India has shown the ability to carry on with both kinds of reforms. I think the easier ones on the plate, I remember 3.5 years ago when we assumed office, the first question being asked, which now looks extremely elementary in the language of reforms, is, are you going to increase the FDI in the insurance sector? That was the first question which used to be put to me. And now if I start recounting the list of reforms, it probably doesn't even figure any of the significant changes and reforms which have been made. I think we've got a broad pattern. India realized that globally integrating itself, opening out, attracting investment, making it an additionality of resource within the country is extremely important. And therefore, the kind of resistance we used to see in the 1990s, I think, has completely disappeared. There are no hackles or even any form of objections or let alone protests. So we've opened up sector after sector, we've simplified procedures, we've done away with the FIPB. I think governments have realized, the central government certainly has realized, and some of the state governments have also realized, that our systems and procedures had to be made much easier. And therefore, in 3 years, we moved up 41 points, 42 points up the World Bank rankings in the ease of doing business itself. Our target is to get into the first 50 from 142 that we started in 2014. And now we've, in taxation, in insolvency, these are the areas we've moved up. And I think some of the areas which are dealt with at the state levels, particularly land and buildings, are areas where we need to push ourselves up significantly. And that's something which we are making a concerted effort on. One important thing that has happened as far as New Delhi particularly is concerned is that we've shrugged off the image of India as a developing economy where decision-making was influenced by collateral or corrupt reasons. I think decision-making is prompt, it is based on market mechanisms, and discretions have been eliminated, and you don't see the kind of work culture which had stigmatized us in the past. So decision making is far quicker, the files move quickly, people don't have to come and chase governments for decisions. I think that whole culture itself has changed. I think amongst the important decisions, amongst a very significant one which has helped us, the financial inclusion, of course, was a massive campaign which we undertook. The unique identity number, Aadhaar, and therefore rationalizing subsidies and expanding that, using that digital footprint and the banking data that we have for several purposes, not only results in saving, but it also results in a very significant aspect of equity itself, was extremely important. The IBC, I think, has shaken a part of India's private sector. The whole institution of creditors chasing debtors and being able to, and doing it indefinitely, being unable to realize their monies or having their debt serviced, I think the whole relationship has undergone a change. What's extremely important, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed, is that we want some early harvest as far as the next few months is concerned in the initial bunch of the IBC cases which has been, which has gone to the NCLT. Demonetization had a few insignificant impacts. I think it brought the whole issue of digitization of the economy to the center stage. It was never an agenda as far as Indian economy was concerned. It helped us to expand, at least in the individual category, the tax base itself. It helped us to squeeze in the first round some aspect of excessive high denominational currency. And it's put a big squeeze as far as terror funding is concerned. It's brought a lot of money into the banks. And the ability of the banks, therefore, to lend is extremely, has significantly moved up. Into the formal sector, whether you look at the monies invested in insurance or in the mutual funds, I think you'll find a sudden spike post demonetization which has itself taken place. And you find an increasing movement now in the mode of payment itself. How India spends its money in the last 1 year, it's becoming somewhat a different economy. The demonetization followed by the GST. Now, this was, I think, a long overdue reform. Now, it required constitution amendment, it required multiple legislations, it required a consensus between the center and the states, and then it requires setting up of the first ever federal institution in the GST Council, getting everybody on board to take various decisions. I think, having gone through the first round, we are now in the process of gradually nudging the whole process of rationalization of the GST as the implementation goes on. And I think this is a process as revenues move up through a more efficient tax system. I think this process of rationalization also will continue itself to take place. Of course, there was one big issue pending, which was a legacy issue, which we were grappling and had found no answer, that is the NPAs in the public sector banks. And therefore, I think a combination of the IBC and now the large-scale recapitalization that we've announced, which should be put into motion expeditiously, I think together will be a significant step forward. We tried various forms of earlier solutions which didn't yield much results, and now with a combination of these two steps, I think we are likely to improve the capacity of the banks even to lend the surplus that they have, particularly to lend it to the small and the medium scale industries which need those funds in abundance, because they are the ones who are big job creators in India and they keep the Indian economy going. How do I see the economy moving? Our basic parameters are quite stable, and we've grown between 7 and 8% in the last 3 years. There is a temporary blip as far as a result of the structural changes which we've taken place. But I think the bottoming out has been complete, and now it should start moving upwards. And with the global economy also moving up, I think it should not be very far off that we acquire a higher growth rate than what we actually had. And therefore, we need over the next at least a decade, if not more, a significantly high growth rate in order to make sure that we are able to deplete our levels of poverty and go ahead with the expansion plan of the Indian economy which we have in mind. That's all I have to say in the opening comments, and the rest I think we can go through during the interaction.
Sure. So we'll open it to questions.